Welcome to Workplace Psychology with Dr. Martha Grajdek. I'm Dr. Martha Grajdek. This podcast examines a wide variety of work-related issues through the lens of industrial and organizational psychology. And while many of the topics discussed here may be seen as intended for white-collar employees and their employers, in reality, the ideas presented here are applicable across organizations and industries. Additionally, many of the topics discussed here may be applicable outside of the workplace. I encourage you to examine what's presented here, apply what makes sense to you, and simply discard the rest. Although you probably already know that certain individuals are simply more focused on perfectionism, that tends to be their way of doing things. But what you may not realize is that there are also organizations that tend to be focused on high performance and also perfectionism as part of that high performance goal or agenda. People who are considered to be high achievers and focus on high performance are not bad things in and of themselves by any stretch of the imagination. What is important for us to realize is that when perfectionism is part of that experience or part of that goal or part of that agenda, that's when things can become tricky and even detrimental. Let's look at perfectionism and its place in high achieving and high performance. For many people, that term perfectionism may seem to be interchangeable with high achievers or high performers. However, there's a big difference. High achievers, high performers, aim for those lofty goals, aim for that excellent job well done. Perfectionism, on the other hand, is inherently flawed in that it may never be achieved. And yes, in the grand scheme of things, perfection can be identified, can be achieved, can be found, but so often for those who may be labeled or who may label themselves as perfectionists, perfection may be just out of reach. Things are not quite finished, they're not quite good enough, they're not quite where the person wants them to be. That can then turn into that never-ending chase that does not have a stopping point. If something can never be quite good enough, quite perfect, quite as the way as you want it, then you're never finished working on that particular goal, on that particular thing. You never achieve that state of perfection as you may have defined it. Take that to the next level of high-performing organizations where perfectionism may be part of the culture. Now we're looking at more than just one individual or maybe a handful of individuals who might label themselves or who might be labeled as perfectionists. Now we're looking at an organization that pushes for high achievement, but also, while doing that, promotes that idea of perfection. That can be quite detrimental to everyone's experience, especially for those team members or those employees who are not necessarily focused on perfection. It's important to recognize that there is a difference between perfectionism and striving for excellence. Excellence can be achieved and identified a lot more readily than perfection, especially by perfectionists or by an organization that promotes or glorifies this idea of perfectionism as a means for high achievement. Chasing a goal that is unattainable can be quite unhealthy, toxic, and destructive. But aiming for excellence, reaching for excellence, is simply doing our best, putting our best foot forward, and giving our efforts to achieve that excellence. It may not be perfect, but we're okay with that as long as that excellence has been attained. It's about doing your best. It's about pushing yourself. And it's about being realistic of what can be achieved. So again, there's a big difference between this idea of perfection versus striving or aiming for excellence. What might an organization that focuses on high performance, but also maybe supports or pushes or glorifies perfectionism look like in terms of the employee experience, especially when most employees are unlikely to be perfectionists? They may be high achievers, they may be high performers, they may strive for excellence, but they're not labeling themselves as perfectionists. Being in an organization where perfectionism is part of that underlying goal, that never-ending experience, that can be a stressful working environment. For one, the goals, the expectations are likely to be unrealistic. It's bad enough when a person has unrealistic goals for themselves, but when those goals come from above, when they come from the leadership, when they come from management, when they come from the organization itself, that can be that much more difficult. There would definitely be a fear of making mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes, but when an organization pushes this idea that there is no room for mistakes, that again can be that much more difficult in terms of the working environment. And yes, of course, there are certain industries, there are certain professions where people really have to take care to make sure that mistakes are not made, because they can be incredibly costly mistakes. They could have to do with safety of other people. They could have to do with keeping people alive. So the stakes will, by nature, be higher for some organizations and some industries and some types of jobs by default. But it is important that the organization not put all of that pressure on individual employees, but rather takes the necessary steps to help employees make as few mistakes as possible, so that collectively employees and the organization take care not to make mistakes. But pushing your employees for perfection as a means of high achievement can be very unhealthy. So, if we have an organization that focuses on high achievement, high performance, and is also pushing perfection, as I mentioned, there may very well be fear of making mistakes, and of course, there will likely be unrealistic expectations from the organization onto its employees. What will that look like? How will that translate into employee experience? It doesn't take much to figure out that there will certainly be some kind of added stress when it comes to workplace experience. Given enough stress for long enough time, now we're also looking at a potential for burnout. But what else comes with that? Stifling creativity will definitely come with the territory. Decreased motivation, disengagement from one's work, a drop in morale, all of those things can become a part of that company and the employee collective. So once again, organizations have to be very careful to be able to differentiate between high performance and mixing in there, be it on purpose or accidentally, this idea of perfection. If you as an organization want your employees to make fewer mistakes, make sure that you provide them what they need to make as few mistakes as possible. That means training, that means tools, that means awareness, that means double and triple checking what's going on. That means accountability on both ends. But besides providing your employees with what they need to make as few mistakes as possible while remaining high achievers and high performers, the organization absolutely has to focus on creating the kind of culture that highlights progress and growth over perfection. One of the dangers of perfection can be that it can absolutely stop progress. If you're never satisfied with your end results, if you are forever fixing or changing or improving on one thing, you can never get past that one thing. Progress comes to a near stop. So organizations will do well to focus on progress, growth, and forward movement over perfection, especially when we're talking about high performance and high achieving organizations. Part of building a culture that focuses on forward movement and growth and progress is a culture that embraces and encourages risk-taking from their employees. Now, risk-taking will look different in different organizations, depending on the type of industry and even the type of job each individual is performing. However, a certain level of risk-taking somewhere within the organization will make for an important part or an important step for progress, growth, and forward movement for that organization as a whole. The other thing that an organization can do as a way of creating that culture that focuses on progress over perfection is to focus on the growth and forward movement of individual employees. It's one thing to focus on the forward movement and growth and progress of the organization as a whole, but in order for that to happen, we also have to focus on moving forward and allowing to grow each individual employee and their careers. So while there are many organizations out there that pride themselves on being focused on high performance, that pride themselves of having high achievers as part of their collective workforce, every organization must take care to ensure that perfectionism does not stop their progress. And once again, this is as important on the organizational level as it is on an individual employee level. The biggest takeaway then is that striving for excellence and perfectionism are not the same thing, and both individual employees and organizations collectively will do well to focus on striving for excellence while embracing creativity, risk-taking, growth, and forward movement, and not allow perfectionism to stifle progress, affect morale and motivation, and add stress and potential burnout into the workplace experience. As this episode comes to an end, let's review what was discussed. Perfectionism is not uncommon in high-performing organizations, but there is a price that comes with perfectionism. It can be detrimental not only to individual employee experience, but also can affect the organization as a whole. Instead of perfectionism, striving for excellence is a better choice of focus for both individuals and organizations. Perfectionism can come with a high price, from increased stress to burnout to lack of motivation and decreased or stifled forward movement. Individual employees and management alike will do well to focus on creating the type of environment and essentially the type of work culture or organizational culture that promotes creativity, forward movement, and excellence over attempts at perfectionism. As the week unfolds, I encourage you to think about perfectionism as it might exist in your own individual experience and within the organization where you might work. Is perfectionism part of your reality, part of your vocabulary, part of your experience? And how does it work out for you? How does it compare to actually striving for excellence? If perfectionism is getting in your way, what can you do differently to focus on excellence, embrace creativity, and aim for growth and forward movement instead of being stuck in that never-ending loop of trying to achieve perfection? For those in management and leadership positions, your responsibility is even greater. You contribute to how the organization as a whole affects the experiences of everyone who works within the organization. You shape and hold the organizational culture and have the responsibility to make sure that perfectionism does not overtake things such as striving for excellence, creativity, and forward movement within the organization. For those of you who experience this podcast in an audio-only version, I encourage you to check out my YouTube channel, Stress Free with Dr. G, where you can find the video version of this podcast. While you're there, check out some of the other videos, all of which focus on stress management. Thank you for joining me today. Please subscribe to this podcast. I look forward to seeing you here again next time. Until then, I wish you joy and well-being.